Mitch, welcome back to the podcast. It's been, as we mentioned in our pre-chat, about 2.5 years since we sat down virtually. I think our first conversation on the Visionary Life podcast was actually just at the beginning of the pandemic. So I think we were supposed to do it in person, and then it turned into a Zoom interview. And here we are 2.5 years later, Zoom interview part two. So, last time we chatted, we kind of talked about a lot of important concepts around building resilience as an entrepreneur and the roller coaster ride that you can expect and sharing the highs and lows. And I think we're going to keep this as a continuation of that conversation and just catching up on what you've been up to since we last chatted. So welcome back to the show.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me back. If you had told me 2.5 years ago that we'd be doing this again over Zoom, and what's occurred in the past 2.5 years I'm not sure I would have believed it, but here we are. I'm happy to be here.
Here we are. And you know what? That's the thing. Like, you know how some people talk about building a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. Sometimes I'm like, I just don't know that we can really calculate where you're going to be in 10 years because so much is serendipitous. And I know both you and I are passionate about connections and saying yes to opportunities and meeting people. And so much unfolds through these moments that we really couldn't plan or put into a 10-year strategy. I don't know how you feel about the long-term planning versus living in the day-to-day and just embracing things as they come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very pragmatic, and I oftentimes, admittedly, for better for worse, live more in the day to day. And I think as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to because you're sort of in the weeds all the time. And one thing that I try to stay conscious of is trying to think a little bit larger, even if knowing that if I build a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan today, it's probably going to be different. I think it's still important to do that, to set those goals for yourself, and manifestation I believe in, and so I think that's important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I kind of have that hybrid approach too. It's like have the plan, but know that there are things that are going to fall into your lap and opportunities that you couldn't have written into that. So it's kind of like fluctuating, but maybe being somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. So since we last chatted, you have embarked on a brand new journey, and you are the co-founder of Darling Mimosa. And I've tried them. They're amazing. They're actually at the LCBO in my tiny little town that I live in. So that's really, really cool. Congratulations. So Darling Mimosa is a canned mimosa drink made with Ontario wine, real juice. We need to know, how the heck did this brand come to be? What's kind of like that aha moment or origin story or whatever you guys call it? Can you take us back to where it all began?
Yeah, I can for sure. I mean, like at the beginning of the pandemic, as a lot of people were doing, I think we all had a lot of time to reflect and sort of like figure out, personal things. And for me, I was really missing sort of like that spark that I had when we started my previous business, Station Cold Brew. Because and what I realized was I really love that sort of like early stage ideation, creative, white market sort of like new product innovation piece to the puzzle. And so I naturally sort of found myself just thinking daily about what could be next. And I had actually come up with a brand concept called Brightside, and the whole idea was just sort of like living life on the bright side. Early on in the pandemic, that was also, I'm not going to use the term mantra, but it was something that I was trying to lean into a little bit because nobody knew what the heck was happening. And feeling sort of like living in gratitude, that's all. And I had mentioned this brand concept to a very close friend of mine who's an amazing award-winning creative director and now business partner, Kim Tarlow. And one day we found ourselves at her cottage in Collingwood, early pandemic. We were sort of in our bubble. There were 6 of us together. And I was making mimosas for the group. And I sort of asked the question, like, how do I make this? Like, I don't know what the ratios are. I wasn't a mimosa drinker. I didn't know a ton about what it was, but obviously was familiar with it because it's so universally recognized. And I had this moment where I was just like, this should just be available in a can. And as a, self-proclaimed beverage nerd, I follow the beverage industry quite closely in Canada, the US, and I know what's happening in the beverage alcohol space, and everything's moving into cans, wine in cans, cocktails in cans, vodka sodas, etc. And so I started digging around, and fortunately, I had some people in my network who was sort of one of my advisors with Station, um, who came from the LCBO, and so I called her to say, like, is there a reason this product doesn't exist? Like, mimosas are one of the most universally recognized cocktails, yet I can't buy it in a can. It doesn't make sense. So is there a reason? Yeah. The answer was there was no good reason. And so naturally I sort of figured out that maybe we could do it ourselves. We paired that with this concept of Brightside, and this sort of like bright, optimistic energy of the Brightside brand that I had come up with, paired nicely with what a mimosa stands for, which is, mimosas are synonymous with celebration. And so we dove in, my partner Kim and I, we in 6 weeks formulated a liquid, built a visual identity for the brand. We brought on an amazing designer to be sort of like co-founder as well, Anna, unbelievable. And the three of us sort of like, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back, 6 weeks was not a lot of time. And we pitched the LCBO, and they loved it. They love the fact that we use Ontario wine. It's a big part of our value proposition. And we wanted to create something that was an authentic mimosa in a can, like pretty straightforward. I joke that I spent 8 years trying to educate people on cold brew coffee, why it's different, a new way to drink coffee, and to drink it out of a can. This is very different and certainly much easier to sort of like educate people. We did run into some trademark issues with the term Brightside, which led us to Darling, which I'm very grateful for. In that moment, when we realized this, I had a very hard time with it, truthfully. But our tagline that we had come up with was, "Go ahead, Darling, live life on the bright side." And so Darling just became this natural fit, and I'm very happy with where we netted out, because the term Darling has this very sort of like lovely, supportive, like I know lots of people whose parents are from the UK, and mm-hmm. and it's a very endearing term.
Yeah.
So there's like this positive association with it, and that's where we landed. So that's like the initial start of Darling, and that was the middle of 2020.
Wow. There's so much that I want to unpack there. But first, do you feel like there was an element of right place, right time, and even to add on to that, right people? Like, it feels like to create something in 6 weeks and to all be like, yeah, let's stop what we're doing and go forward with this. Like, something was working there.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, I think that people are presented with opportunities all the time in terms of timing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And, it's a very fortunate and privileged thing to say, of course. Not everybody is given that. And I feel grateful that I do have that opportunity and did have that opportunity. But the timing was great, for sure. And the people are the most important part. Like, yeah. I've said this from my days with Station, like, Station would never be what it was without my two partners. Like, I firmly believe in knowing what you're good at and what you want to be spending your time doing, and surrounding yourself with people who sort of complement that. And we've got an amazing team. And, mm-hmm. Kim is one of my best friends too, which is an interesting path to go down, starting a business with one of your best friends, but yeah. It's been incredible. There's a tremendous amount of trust. She's an award-winning creative director who has done some incredible things. And, I think the people that we've started it with are very important.
Mm-hmm. Something that you guys seem to have completely mastered is the branding of Darling. Like, I actually didn't know the story of Brightside and how that tied in, but when I look at the can and the design aesthetic, that is a word that I would say. Like, I'd be like, it's just bright and it makes me feel cheery and positive. How much of the brand actually came from that word? Like, did that kind of direct how you brought the can to life and just like the general aesthetic of what you built overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is that, with Station, I was the brand guy, like I was the marketing person, and with Darling, I've actually taken a step aside simply
Mm,
because of the qualifications of Kim and our designer Anna. Like they've done some incredible work, and I've been involved in the process, of course, and it's been a team effort, but uh, I put a lot of trust in them in getting us to where we are, and look
yeah.
at the results. I think that um, we probably talked about this on our previous chat, but I think that brand has to mean more than the product, and I think there are way too many brands who don't understand that,
Yeah.
what it is, and when I look at your product, I should be able to feel something. I should be able to understand what you're trying to emote, and you just described it. Like what you just described is exactly what we're trying to do with Darling. And like I said before, it's built on the platform of optimism and celebration. And celebration is synonymous with mimosas, sure. And that's weddings and holidays and brunch in the park with friends. Those are all celebratory moments. And optimism is just something that I think everybody needs right now. Like there's just so much that's happened in the past 2.5 years, and I think that
Hmm.
that's what we're trying to really convey. So the brand, and when you think about the competitive nature of the LCBO and this category, you need a good brand to stand out on shelf. Like we went with bright and bold colors, yes, because it fits what we're trying to convey, and the name and the story and all of that, but also because it's something that will stand out on shelf, and that's how you're going to try to compete with some of the big guys.
Hmm. And aside from being on shelf at the LCBO, are you currently doing any online marketing, like your digital shelf? Is there a presence there? What's working outside of just being in brick and mortar stores?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are a lot of regulations, and this was a big learning for me
Yeah.
moving into alcohol. There's a ton of regulations that is slowly getting better. The LCBO is really the place where you have to start, and we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to be there. We actually aren't able to sell direct to consumer online because we don't manufacture the product ourselves, and so there's some regulations around that we're trying to work through. I'm also hopefully working towards getting our product into sort of like grocery because, as you know, that's evolving, and I think
Yeah.
there's a great opportunity for us, and something I know very well from my previous role.
Hmm.
Um, we are constantly building the brand online. That's a big part of what we do. I think that um, you know the big thing about Darling, and this is sort of off topic to what you've asked, but it's important, is that we firmly believe that like the demographic that we're going after is very underrepresented and oftentimes spoken to in a very sort of like archaic way. Like
Hmm.
there's no question that our demographic is heavily female. And that's why my partner Kim, who's also a new mom, is like she knows how to speak to that demographic. And it's about sort of just like talking to them, not with them, not at them. And I think there's a lot of brands that have identified females as their target, and they do it in such a like old school cheesy way. And that's not what we're trying to do at Darling. We're trying to build a brand that speaks to our core demo as just like a friend, somebody who understands and is going through the same stuff. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and that's also why I don't handle that part of the business, because I have no right in doing that.
I love it. And it sounds like you kind of identified a weak spot in the market. Like most brands are not in conversation with women. And you're like, we can do this differently, right?
Mhm.
Instead of just doing it the way it's always been done. It's like, no, what is our brand voice and how can we carry that through so that it actually sets us apart from every other brand who might have a similar product or a similar message to share?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that with Kim and Anna and myself, we also brought on two other individuals over the past year and a half. Another which is female. So 3 out of 5 of us are females. So we're 60% female owned right now, and
Hmm.
that's really important to us, and certainly to me. Like I think females are definitely underrepresented and undersupported as founders. And there's all sorts of statistics around how much funding with startups goes towards male founders versus female founders, and
Yeah.
and it's also a part of the DNA of our business. And again, it goes back to like surrounding yourself with the right people. I would never be able to do this on my own.
Yeah. And I know a big piece of our last conversation was always making sure that you do surround yourself with awesome people, and to really know what you are good at and to bring in people who maybe fill those gaps. And I love that that is still kind of probably a core belief of you personally, but also of your team as you build out Darling. It's like, no, like there are people who are better at branding than I, or better at insert job title here than I, and you're looking to kind of bring in the best talent and people who can fill those voids.
No question. It's a core belief that I learned and has just become sort of like one of the most valuable lessons I've learned as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to spending time as the co-founder of Darling, you're also doing consulting and advising for various beverage and CPG brands. So what prompted you to want to dive into the world of consulting, and tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, of course. I mean, what started that was, when I was starting out in my entrepreneurial journey, a lot of people gave me a lot of time. And, there's a lot of lessons that were shared with me early on that maybe I was told and didn't have to go through. And, I firmly believe in giving back. And I have a lot of lessons to share that will hopefully, help people along their journey. And, it's not apples to apples. It's also very important to me when I'm consulting or advising to say, like, my experience is this. It may not be the same for you, and have empathy towards the situation that that person's in and their business and the product. And there's so many variables.
Yeah.
But it's really the love for helping people, and also just the community in the natural sort of like health and wellness, food and beverage world, which I know you know quite well. The community is incredible, and I've met some of the best people in that world. And during the pandemic, the sort of like the CHFA type trade shows were missing, and I recently went to one, and it was amazing to reconnect with so many awesome people. And so it's also that love for the space and the innovation and the new brands, and sort of like pushing boundaries when it comes to products. That's the stuff that really pushed me into trying to share some of my experience to help other founders.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever doubt in the fact that people would want to hire you, like experience any imposter syndrome, or did you always feel confident that like you've been through a lot, in bringing what you have to life and all the lessons, experiences that you've alluded to, that you do have enough to share? Where did you find yourself when you started to come out as an advisor, as a consultant?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question there's a tremendous amount of imposter syndrome. Like I'm a pretty straightforward guy, and like, I experience a lot of that. I really do. And it's constantly getting better in that, I will leave a conversation with somebody, whether it's as a consultant, advisor, or just a friend. And I will oftentimes think to myself, wow, you've shared a lot because you've been through a lot, and it's a good reminder to do that. But and the truth is that I have been through a lot, and I want to be able to share that. So perception is a very interesting thing. I actually posted something on LinkedIn a little while ago around perception, and whether it's looking at a business or looking at an individual, whether it has to do with their professional journey or their personal journey, mental health plays a factor in this. I think that it's important to look at somebody and also and realize that maybe they don't have their shit together, or maybe that business doesn't have their shit together. Like maybe it's looks like one of the most successful businesses, but on the back end, they're struggling with all sorts of stuff. And it's just a reality. And that's okay. Like, I think that's the important part, is that's just the way it is. And that's also why it's important to surround yourself with great people, because they're the ones who are going to help you get through those things. So
true. And It's interesting too, because I mean, we can scroll LinkedIn or be on Instagram and see all the highlight reel and what's going well. But I feel like there's also this reminder that we all need that two states can kind of coexist at once. Like you can be having a ton of success in business, but also it's like a complete disaster on the back end. Or in my own experience, I felt like last year I had the best year of my life, but I also had the worst year of my life. And it's hard to explain that to people who maybe haven't felt that dichotomy of like things can be going really well, but they can also be really, really hard. Or I can appear to be very happy at the trade show, but I can also be dealing with my own crap on the back end. And one thing does not necessarily have to be mutually exclusive from the other. And it's a conversation that is not had a lot. And also, I think as just human beings who we make quick judgments, we see something happening in someone's life, or we identify a business that's doing well, and we assume that is somehow a blanket statement to the rest of their life or to the rest of their business. But it's like, no, 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 no. Like that is a small snippet. And there can also be something else happening that is actually like really, really hard, or that is not perfect and shiny and successful. So it's tough if you like haven't really sat down and thought how these states coexist, but it's true. Like there could be a business that we seemingly think is doing really well, but that is duct taped together, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that like, that it's a complete write-off. So I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I everything you said is exactly the way I think, and things that I've thought about a lot. I think that there are midday squares is such an easy example to use for a great reason. Like they show the back end of all the crap that happens
Yes.
behind the scenes, and I think that's
Yep.
really important. And I love those guys. Like it's an amazing team, and they're doing some really great stuff. But like I think it's important to know that yes, they can coexist. It's not one or the other, and oftentimes one leads to the other, right? Like if you think about it, you have to go through the tough stuff to get to the good stuff. And oftentimes, as you're growing a business or growing as an individual with more good stuff, because you're evolving,
Mm-hmm.
will come opportunity for more bad stuff. And that's the sort of like up and down roller coaster that is business and life and all of these things. So
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree with that, and it's something that I'm just always thinking of.
Yeah. I'm sure in your consulting and in your advising, and even with Darling, like you've had moments where you just feel like things aren't going that well, or you're working with a client where they're like, we don't know, we're hitting a wall here. How do you stay the course when things aren't necessarily panning out the way you thought they would? Or if you're working with a client that's like, I just want to throw in the towel, or I'm having a bad day, like how do you move through a tough season, a tough day, a tough week, and know that there probably is going to be something better down the line or down the road?
Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to the consulting side, I think the relationships that I like to build are very open and honest and sort of like empathetic. And so I
Yeah.
always approach any relationship like that. And so if I'm having a bad day or can't do something for somebody in time, like I'm the first to admit that. When it comes to business, there's been moments. There are two things that occurred during my days at station that felt like the end of the world. Like two very specific memories that I have. One was like a production issue that was a disaster. One was like a misprint on a label. Like there's some very big things, and those two circumstances were very important lessons for me in how to handle when things like that happen. And
Mm.
there's a scenario early on with Darling where something happened, and I remember sort of like having this visceral reaction, like physical reaction to it, like almost an anxiety attack about how am I going to deal with this, and then took some time to sit down and to think about my previous experience, and it allowed me to handle it differently and know that these things happen and that there's ways to fix it, and that it's that cyclical roller coaster that comes up and down. And I've been able to share that with a few people that I'm advising and working with as well. I had one of them call me last week with like a challenge that reminded me of that circumstance that I previously mentioned. And
Mhm.
and was able to sort of like help her work through it. And I think that's just like all it is it's not going to always be great.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's okay. It's about how you deal with the challenges that come up, and um and that's really all that it is.
Mhm. And it's tough too sometimes as a consultant because like it's you that is often needed as, you know, the face of your brand, as the person who's doing a lot of the thinking and advising. So when you're having a tough day or a personal challenge, to be able to say like you do, hey, I just can't show up today, or to have that transparent conversation of, you know what, I just, we need to recalibrate and maybe chat tomorrow instead. It's tough because it's hard to sometimes admit, like, I'm not feeling 100% or 110%. So I can't be there today, or we just
Mm-hmm.
need to put this on pause. What do you do to recalibrate yourself if you find yourself going towards a dip or maybe waking up in a dip? How do you nurture that and honor that and hopefully come out the other side stronger?
Yeah, I mean, easier said than done. And even as you're like saying that, I'm like thinking to myself, I've been burning out a little bit. Maybe I need that time right now.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
so
Little
it's a good
mental
reminder.
reminder.
It's a good reminder. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, like friends and family are very important to that. Spending time with them in like a very present manner as best as possible. You know,
Yeah.
exercise for me is a very important thing. I've actually sort of like, this sounds ridiculous to say, but like during the pandemic, I did a lot of walking, and I've
Oh,
started to
yeah.
appreciate walking a little bit. Like I was a pretty heavy sort of like CrossFit guy for a while, and my it took a little bit of a toll on my body. And you know, I've started to learn the best ways as I get older, the best ways to manage exercise for me. And you know, walking has been a part of it. And I'll throw on a podcast, whatever that is, and that might be something that's sort of like educational, but it might be something about, you know, sports, because I'm a
Yep.
big sports guy. So it's like those are the types of things that allow me to really like manage those moments and the days that and the time that I need to refresh, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh man. I feel like every year that I get older, walking becomes way more enjoyable. And I'm actually
Absolutely.
trying to train myself now. Walk without a podcast, Kelsey. Like just go and listen to the sounds of nature and get
Hmm.
your next best idea, or like tune in to that next aha moment that might be
Hmm.
you know, that jumps out at you when you're just walking in peace.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, I love that. So curious, like right now, what does a week in the life of Mitch look like? So I know you've got your hands in Darling Mimosa, you've got your other projects. Like, what does a week in the life look like? What are you up to?
Yeah, I mean, today looks different than it did last week or the week before, of course. You know, I'm juggling a lot of things right now, and admittedly, for a very long time, I how do I put this? For a very long time, the story I was telling myself was that I lack focus because I'm doing a lot of things,
Yeah.
and that I need focus. Um, I'm a really good multitasker, and I
Yeah.
can do a lot of things at once. And the story I was telling myself was, because I can do that, I'm not focused. But actually, something that I've spoken with my therapist about is actually multitasking takes a lot of focus. And so it's like just retelling myself that story of like, that's just something I'm really good at, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, my days jump from Darling to other brands that I'm working with. You know, I try to block my schedules accordingly. I try to leave, you know, Fridays open
Yep.
just in case something comes up, or have lunch with somebody, or you know, I'm obviously trying to get out in the world more now as opposed to video chats.
Yes.
I actually had a meeting this morning with a gentleman who I had just assumed we were going to meet on video, and he was like, "Can you come to my office?" And I was like, "Yes."
Thank
and
God.
and it wasn't close, but I was happy to get in the car and
Yep.
drive and be there. And I think the meeting was way more productive than it would have been over video.
Totally.
And yeah, so I mean, my weeks always look different. I try to schedule time for myself when I can. I'm usually up early in the morning. I don't try to jump into work right away. There are days where I have to, of course. Sometimes I'll try to exercise in the morning, even if it's just a quick walk. I got into a pretty good habit of doing that a while ago. In the evenings, I'm working sometimes, but again, try to protect my time when and where I can.
Mhm.
And same thing with weekends. So it's constantly evolving, and I'm sort of embracing that of that sort of fluidity of my schedule, because I thrive a little bit more in structure.
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to sort of just accept the balance of structure and like flow a little bit.
Yeah. And I love that reframe of what you were talking about. Like, just because you're a multitasker, it doesn't mean you're not focused. Because I think so often that is the story that a lot of entrepreneurs actually tell themselves. Because the reason why they keep starting these ideas is because they've got a lot going on and they like to have 10 tabs open at once, and they like to flip flop from this project to the next to the next. And for me, that's why I love the consulting industry. It's because it allows me to work with multiple clients, multiple projects, to have a few things on the go. I never get bored. I never feel like I have to stay dialed in to one project because, hey, if my creativity shifts or if I get an idea, I can go to the next thing and pour into that and then go back to what I was working on. And for me, for so long, I told myself this story that I just like had the ADD brain, and that, like I could never dedicate myself or just like time block in a way. But I realized that's just not honoring my biology and the way that I like to work, and reframing that to actually say, this is maybe my superpower is that I can
Hmm.
change from a creative task to like a strategic task to back to, doing whatever else I need to do. And I think it's an important reminder for anyone listening who is starting a business or who is working in a business that you can tap into some of the things that you may have seen as like a weakness, and actually ask yourself, how can I reframe this? And maybe it can become my strength. Because my guess is that there are a lot of things that we tell ourselves are bad qualities to run a business that actually could be shifted into, no, actually, this is going to help me in so many ways to stand out from other consultants, because, it allows me to, be more passionate when I am in my work.
Hmm. Yeah, no question. I think that it's really important because we're sort of like taught this, and I see it all the time on Instagram and TikTok, and like these sort of like productivity hacks, and like organizing your life this way and this way, and those things are amazing,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it doesn't work for everybody, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own way of working, um, and so I think it's important to just embrace the way that works for you, evolve, of course, and you can get better at everything always. But yeah, it's a really, really important lesson for me that I've tried to embrace as best as possible and not feel guilty about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it goes back to the concept of like, there is no one size fits all formula. And when you try to copy someone's formula from TikTok and then it doesn't work for you, you think, oh, well, I'm the problem. It's like, well, no, you're not the problem. It's just that that was not the method that fits with who you are as a human. And that's why I think you alluded to it, the fact, or when we began this podcast, that you are happy to share your experience, but you're not saying like, this is exactly what's going to work
Yeah,
when you launch your canned alcohol beverage brand, right? It's like, I can share my
100%.
experience, but you have to kind of take what resonates, and we need to test and iterate and then find the method that's going to work for this brand or, whoever you're working with, right?
Totally. I recently, I'm reminded of this. I recently saw like a mock video on TikTok of like, um, it was mocking this sort of like idea of, the 100 most successful entrepreneurs and what their morning routine looks like and what they get done before everybody else is even awake.
Yeah.
And again, if that sort of lifestyle works for you and you're efficient in doing it, I am all for it. And I've tried the 5:30 a.m. wake up and write and meditate and do all these things before I even start my day. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But this video that I saw was, it was just like all of these things that this person was doing before everybody else was awake. And it was like the most obscure thing that you could even consider anybody doing. And it was just another good reminder of like, also don't take it so seriously sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
1000%. So I'm curious, because now that you are consulting various brands, you're probably starting to see some through lines or trends, or just the fact that you have a lot of connections in the natural health industry, in the CPG industry. Do you feel like there are any common threads between brands that make it and brands that don't? And if so, like what could you boil down, like maybe one or two, just trends, common themes that you see that make a brand stand out, that make a brand successful?
Yeah, I mean, like I am obviously a very big proponent of spending a lot of time, even though we only launched ours in 6 weeks, it's evolved a lot, but spending a lot of time in thinking about what your brand stands for. I think that that is something that not everybody does enough of, and I previously mentioned it, and that is something that will allow a brand to evolve quicker, no matter if you have a good or bad product. Like the amount of products that launch that are great but fail simply because of execution, like there's so many of them. And so I think that that sort of like brand strategy foundation stuff is so important. Like one of the exercises I do with some of my clients is like, if you were a celebrity, who would you be and why? Like who would the brand be and why? And it's just a fun exercise, but it actually really allows you to understand sort of like the values and how you want your brand to show up in the world.
Yeah.
And it's those types of things that will allow for like a really solid foundation, and also give you what I would call like a North Star in terms of making decisions, right? Like if your brand stands for X and you want to innovate into X category, but it doesn't align with that, it's a clear no. Or if somebody comes to you with a partnership opportunity, but it doesn't align with what your brand stands for, then it's a clear no.
Yeah.
It's really important work. And then like just another thing that comes to mind for me is this sort of like idea of nostalgia. I'm a big believer in nostalgia as a foundation or as a tool, whether it be in product or brand. You know, a lot of right now on the design side, I see like a lot of like 60s, 70s sort of like retro inspired stuff happening, which is awesome. You know, this is super random. I'm a big Toronto Blue Jays fan. We don't have to talk about what recently happened, but you know, a few years ago, they sort of went back and brought back some of the like nostalgia of their earlier team, like the baby blue uniforms and stuff. And it's brought a lot of people back into baseball, whether you actually like baseball or not. And then in the food and beverage world, like, you know, some of the biggest companies right now are taking nostalgic products and making it newer, better for you, and putting a good brand behind it. Like, you know, Smart Sweets is a great example. Halo Top ice cream did it. You know, even Midday Squares is doing it with sort of like, you know, for lack of better term, because their product is more than that, but it's like, it's a brownie. It's a really good brownie that's better for you. And so I think nostalgia is something that stands out and has proven to work. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but it's clearly working in some cases.
Yeah, it's like one arm of your marketing strategy that you can leverage or see if it fits within. And it's so funny that you bring this up, because I've actually never really thought about this concept as it relates to marketing before. But in the marketing course that I teach at a local college, we talk so much about current events and making your marketing relevant to the day and age that we live in. And like, if the Blue Jays are winning, then, you know, maybe you can capitalize on that. Or if, you know, there is Christmas coming up, whatever. But we don't actually talk so much about nostalgia and playing on that. Like, we're always thinking what's happening now, what's relevant in this moment, not so much what does your dream client feel nostalgic around. Like, is it a certain era? Is it a certain, you know, chapter of their life? And how can you actually build that into the marketing in addition to keeping it relevant and making
Right.
sure you are taking advantage of current themes and current happenings in the world. So I think it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, and I think an important piece to that though is knowing your consumer, right? Like
Yes.
who are you talking to and what do they care about? So
Right, right.
this is where the Blue Jays comes back. To me, they did a great job at understanding that, let's call it 5 years ago,
Yeah.
people who experienced their success in the early 90s are now at the age where they're in their early, mid, late 30s, maybe
Yeah.
early 40s, where they're the ones who they're trying to get to go to the games to
Right.
spend the money and are actually sort of like buying merchandise and maybe even having kids to bring them into it now. And so that's why it worked. And I
Yeah.
think that and so I think it's important whether you're talking about current events or historical events, you need to make sure that your customer cares. And
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of brands uh, force themselves to talk about things when their customer actually doesn't care about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So true. And before I let you go, I know you are, a very skilled marketer. Where are you seeing the attention going right now, whether that's online marketing, offline marketing, certain platforms? Like, if you were to give advice to someone who's feeling a little bit lost in terms of how to get their brand out there, what do you see as kind of the way they should be spending their time and energy?
That's a really tough one, just because again, there's so many variables of product, place, people, all of those things. But I think it's very clear to me that it's so easy to get lost online right now. Like it's unless
Yeah.
you are spending a ton of money on good creative, good content, and or actual ad spend, like standing out online is very difficult.
Yeah.
TikTok is obviously a platform where it's both easy and hard at the same time to stand out. Like there's more of an opportunity to do so, but you need to
Yeah.
sort of be lucky a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and then, what I believe, my experience is rooted in experiential marketing. Like that's what I was doing before Station. And so I believe in the power of sort of like, for lack of a better term, with beverage, liquid to lips, or like getting your
Yeah.
product in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that there's a desire because of what's gone on the past 2.5 years for that to come back.
Yeah.
And so I think that in the next, hopefully, if things continue to progress in the right direction and the world becomes at least, the new normal, I think that, in-person events, samplings, any way to be face to face with a consumer for a brand, I think is going to become even more important
Yep.
because as much as we're progressing digitally, we're also regressing a little bit in that, like,
Mhm.
I mentioned it before about just going to my meeting today face to face.
Yeah.
Like, how do you take that idea and apply it to a brand and how they're marketing to their core demographic? Like, getting face to face with people, I think, is going to become even more important. The challenge then becomes that's a very expensive thing to do. So,
Mhm.
depending
Mhm.
on what category you play in, your budget, your geographical reach, all of those things, important factors to take into
Mhm.
account.
Definitely something to consider. It's like, we
Yeah.
had our years of like, everybody just go online and pump your money into ads. But now it's like, wait, wait, wait. There might be a happy medium here where you definitely want the in person, the experiential, but also piggybacking or, just also showing up in the online channels. So,
Of course.
yeah, finding that balance for you. So
Yeah.
amazing. So, how can we stay connected with you, Mitch? What are the best ways for us to get in contact, to grab Darling Mimosas, to work with you as an advisor, as a consultant? Yeah, how do we connect?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I've found myself quite active on LinkedIn lately, and I'm really enjoying it because it's I don't know, I've just started to understand the algorithm a
Yes.
little bit, and I've also started to I've met some incredible people and been connected to some incredible people. So
Amazing.
LinkedIn is a good one.
Yep.
And then with Darling, we are available at a few hundred LCBOs across the province, and
Wow.
that number fluctuates. We're doing our best to keep it consistent. Our traditional orange flavored mimosa will be available. We had a seasonal grapefruit SKU, which is harder to find, but there are some great places to still get it within the city outside of the LCBO. We've got some fun stuff that we're planning for next summer at the LCBO that I can't share yet, but
Cool.
some really cool innovation. And so, I don't know if you know this, but you can actually go online to the LCBO's website and look up a brand, and it'll actually tell you which store closest to you has how many units.
Yes. So
And
handy.
yeah, it's actually, and it's extremely up to date. Like, I'm very impressed with it. So that's always an easy way to see if your local LCBO has it.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And I must say, like, Darling Mimosa is like the perfect cocktail to have at baby showers, at bachelorette parties, wedding showers. Like, there's just so many occasions where you don't want to like mix up a big batch of sangria necessarily because you don't know how many people will be drinking. You want cans on hand so that you can just
Mhm.
crack them open, keep them on ice on a nice like ice bucket. I don't know. And aesthetically, they look beautiful too. So perfect for Instagram and wherever you're sharing your photos. So, anyways, we'll include lots of photos in the show notes and encourage everyone to connect with you and to say hello on LinkedIn, and also to go follow you guys on Instagram, Facebook, and at the
Amazing.
LCBO if they can find you. So, thank you so
That's great.
much for sharing your time with us, for coming back on season 10. We really appreciate it and wish you all of the best on your journey.
Thank you.